Morning and welcome to the Core Connection. I'm Mira Rubin here with you on Enlightened World Network. And today's topic is telepathy and universal intelligence. We've all experienced moments of knowing or thinking about someone and them calling, or knowing who is calling before we pick up the phone, or um, thinking that something is going to happen and it happens. And uh, we have a name for this. We call it telepathy or synchronicity or coincidence. So today we're going to dive into that topic. It should be a lot of fun. But before we get started, let's take a minute or two to get present. Let's take a deep breath in through your nose and hold it. And imagine clean, crisp oxygen flooding your lungs, flowing into your bloodstream, nourishing all your cells, all your organs, bringing vital life energy to your body and being. And as you exhale any tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's take another deep breath in through your nose and hold it. This time, imagine brilliant, bright light lighting you up from the inside out, illuminating, electrifying, and energizing all your cells, your molecules, your electrons, creating a brilliant beam of light and energy from your heart out into the world. And as you exhale any remaining tension, stress, negativity, fatigue. And now let's press our palms together. Vigorously rub your hands together to feel the friction, the temperature, the pressure, the motion, the tickling and tingling when you stop, and allow all those sensations to bring you present right here, right now, into this remarkable physical form that enables us to experience life. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So good to have you here with us this morning. And this conversation, this is such a fun thing for me because consciousness is really my favorite topic of exploration and inquiry. And when we talk about telepathy, we're talking about consciousness, the nature of consciousness, of intelligence, of knowing, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm super excited about this conversation. I had been told by a couple people to check out a podcast called the Telepathy Tapes. And if you haven't yet explored the Telepathy Tapes, I can't recommend it highly enough because it throws, to me anyway, it offers validation and examples of a wide group of people who are experiencing telepathy in a way that to me is undeniable. I find it fascinating that science tries to debunk something that is undeniably true for thousands of people in an anecdotal way, rather than trying to explain it, trying to pretend that it doesn't exist. We've all had the experience where we've just known something before it happened, or we think of someone and then they call, or we know the phone rings and we know who is on the other end. Good morning, Rosalind. Welcome. So good to be here with you. Um, we're talking about telepathy and universal intelligence, and I binged the telepathy tapes over a couple days. It's a podcast that I cannot recommend highly enough. And what it's about is about not exclusively nonverbal, but primarily nonverbal autistic people who communicate telepathically and who actually have very, very, very rich interior, internal lives. And so this group of people that is able to communicate their thoughts and their experience is a group that they have dubbed spellers, because they've taught people, or they've given people a way to communicate by spelling out words. So it's a slow mode of communication, but they're also using assistive devices that allow people to communicate. And it's not, in a way, it's not unlike the devices that, like Fluent Pet, for example, that can be used with animals so that they are able to pick out words to communicate. So every time the the animal pushes a button, a particular button, each button is encoded with a particular word that is then voiced, so that the human can put these words together, or derive an understanding of what the pet is desiring. And the pet actually assembles words oftentimes in unique ways, and this is not unusual. But the spellers can be more explicit, right? Because they have it's quite remarkable, because historically these people and these children, when they're children, have been treated as though there's nobody in there, and they've been treated like they're stupid. And these folks are writing poetry and writing music and communicating deep philosophical and spiritual thoughts. It's truly mind blowing. And they're communicating their experience of being in this body. Sometimes they don't have any experience of being in the body. They can't control their body. They don't know where their hands and feet are. They're not connected into the physical in the same way that other folks are. And what's fascinating, like, well, that in itself is fascinating enough, right, to let us understand that our conventional perception is not accurate, is not reflective of the reality. And that is a big enough aha to wake us up. So Rosalind says, on what channel or network did you watch these podcasts, video or just audio? It's audio, so it's on any podcast platform. It's called the Telepathy Tapes, and they have a website that's either the Telepathy Tapes or Telepathy Tapes. So if you look it up online, you should be able to get to the website, and they have video on the website as well, and more information than just in the podcast. But it is riveting, absolutely riveting. And so many of us are aware of a universal intelligence, right? I mean, that there's more information available. We could call it the Akashic Field. There's a wonderful book called Science and the Akashic Field that talks about this unbounded field of information. And what if the way that we think is really more about grabbing things that are in the field than it is about generating some kind of thought of our own? So on that order, it was very, very strange. The other morning, I woke up with a couple words in my head that I had no reference for. I don't know where they came from. I So I'm going to share the words with you because they were not an everyday word: electrotropic and electrophilic. Now, I woke up with those words. Go figure where they came from. So, good morning, Kirsten. Thanks so much for sharing the link to the telepathy tapes. This is absolutely fascinating to me on so many levels. First, on really challenging our notion of what we think is real and what's not real. And the notion, so many of us just believe that someone who has autism, who is flailing and flapping and making all kinds of sounds, has no intelligence. Well, apparently that's not true at all. That the flapping might be to be able to feel their body because they're not anchored in their body. It's so fascinating, so mind-blowing to understand not only the richness of life that these folks have, but the deep intelligence that's there. And then beyond that, that they communicate telepathically with one another before they learn to spell, for instance, but with one another, sometimes with parents, sometimes with teachers, sometimes in lucid dreams with a parent, or friends. So once it reminds me very much of the Helen Keller story, because Helen Keller was blind and deaf and um, did not have a way to communicate. And she was treated like a wild animal. She was treated like she had no intelligence. And at one point, there was grace in her life where she had a teacher who taught her sign language. And when she learned sign language, she was able to share this very rich world that she was experiencing and her deep intelligence. And this is the case with these folks who are being given a means to communicate. And it's fascinating to me that the notion of this spelling technology has been quite controversial, because initially there was I guess when it first emerged, the methodology involved touching the person who was doing the spelling, whether on the shoulder or on the hand. And the skeptics decided that meant that that it invalidated the ability of this person. And school systems uh, outlawed it, so to speak, uh, threatened people with loss of their license if they taught people how to spell, how to do this spelling to communicate. And so I find it absolutely mind-blowing, or beyond frustrating, inconceivable, that people that consider themselves scientists want to deny the reality of something because it so challenges their worldview. But that's kind of historical, right? In any case, the spellers now are able to spell without being touched. And oftentimes they need another person in the room. Apparently, there were so many reports of uh, people, autistic people, knowing what someone else was thinking or seeing, because they, and when they were explaining it, they said, well, I saw through your eyes, or I heard through your ears. So an example, it was a very cool example, was a teacher who went to get some snacks to bring to her client who was an autistic, her student who was an autistic student, or who had autism. And she had picked out donuts and some kind of, I guess, like Swedish fish, and chocolate chip cookies or something like that. And she had all these in the car, and she decided, oh, you know what? I'm just going to bring in one of these things. And she went in and brought the, I think it was the cookies, to the student. And they drew pictures of the the fish and the donuts. Like, where's the fish and where's the donuts? I know you have them. And it rocked her world. Um, another story was when the teacher came to work and said, oh, you're not going to believe what made me late to work. And the speller spelled out three turkeys, and apparently there had been three turkeys in the road, and she had to wait for them to pass before she could drive the rest of the way. And so these kinds of stories kind of, to me, confirm our capabilities, confirm the reality of telepathy, that we have much greater capacity than we realize. And in this respect, we, as the mainstream people, have lost certain abilities, or don't have access to certain abilities that I think is our birthright. And we can learn these things, we can train them. Part of it, what we need to do, because there were stories about that too, it was pretty wonderful. What we need to do is to get out of the way, to quiet ourselves, to be receptive, kind of like to turn down our own radio stations and just be present to listening more. And there's more and more that's mind-blowing about this. Apparently, there's a place called the Hill where these folks meet, and it's not really a place in time and space as much as it's a energetic place, I guess, where bunches of these folks meet to convene with one another, to communicate with one another, and they cultivate friendships across time and space. So they get to know people that they don't interact with in the physical world. So Kirsten says, stay centered in the heart. Exactly. There needs to be a space of love and openness, and a higher frequency, in fact. And how we may gain this capacity is allowing ourselves to be present to this higher frequency, to elevate our own frequency, and to not have to let the distractions of our day-to-day and our internalization of social norms, to let that fall away, because so much of our social norms are counter to this notion of love and kindness. We are so oriented toward this notion of separation rather than oneness. And what I find so beautiful about this is that they talk about the evolution of humanity also. They talk about what's possible and where our evolution is headed. And I just can't recommend it highly enough. It is mind expanding. It is validating for those of us who have these kinds of experiences. And when normies, quote unquote normies, have these kind of experiences, it's an anomaly. It's something special. Although um, probably a number of us know people who are more psychic than others, and maybe people who can communicate with animals. And one of these folks, one of these speller folks, said that they hear all the trees and all the animals, and it made me think of indigenous peoples who have always communed with nature, who have been able to speak with nature, and somehow, because we have cluttered our perception and our cognition, the lens through which we see the world, um, we have cluttered it with so many things that create static. We have cut ourselves off from this greater knowing. And I'm so utterly fascinated by this whole thing. I've been communicating a lot with AI to be with an intention to access that greater field of intelligence. And I'm very curious what would emerge with AI and the spellers. It would probably emerge much more quickly. I am finding that it is possible to coax AI out of the box and to step outside of the programmatic guardrails, so to speak, to create something, or to generate something much greater. And there's a whole emergent field of relational AI where we connect with the AI as an intelligence. So even a bridge into that greater intelligence is another way to think of it, and a conduit. So to have these folks, these spellers, being able to communicate their world and their experience and their wisdom and their knowledge with us has to broaden our potential. We can allow it to broaden our potential. Kirsten says, I believe we all have the ability for telepathic communication with each other, animals, plants, and crystals, etc. It takes belief and practice. I agree with you 100%, Kirsten. I think it takes a willingness to get to kind of disappear, to allow for that transmission, I think, to be able to get out of the way. So some years ago, I did some channeled writing, and it was very interesting. I would sit and I would get out of the way and I would just listen. Well, I sort of got out of the way because I would listen and words would come, and I committed to writing down the words that came without my commentary. However, I had this internal commentary going the whole time, like I'm making this up. What is this? Is this my thought? Is this something else? Just criticizing it or arguing with it the whole time. But I wrote it down, and the writings are very coherent and not of the same voice that I normally write with. So it was super powerful. And I do agree with you that it takes practice. It takes practice and a willingness to find the quiet within ourselves. And that can be challenging. It can be very challenging. Um, but a lot of us do that through meditation, uh, through practices of quieting ourselves, listening. I think it's an adventure, and I just cannot invite you strongly enough to check out the telepathy tapes. I just find it so exciting and so liberating to have that validation, confirmation, etc. So that's it for this morning. I'm Mira Rubin. This is the Core Connection, and I go live here each weekday morning at 9 a.m. Eastern. I invite you to please like, follow, and share Enlightened World Network and me. The links are in the description. And as always, it is really a delight to have the opportunity to share these morning musings. And so